The courtroom smelled like old paper and stale coffee, a mix so familiar yet suffocating. I sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, listening to the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from someone in the gallery. Outside, the California sun was shining, but in here, it felt like the world had gone gray. I tried to focus on the judge, on the words that might offer some sliver of mercy, but my mind kept drifting to him, my husband, the man who had promised forever, now sitting across from me as if I were a stranger. He looked calm, confident, untouchable. His fingers were interlaced behind his head, a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't glance at me once, but I could feel the weight of his gaze anyway, heavy and deliberate, like a hammer slowly coming down. The judge cleared her throat and called the case. I tried to straighten my spine, tried to make my voice steady when my name was spoken, but it felt like I was speaking underwater. He had taken everything. The $600,000 house that had been ours, the home we had chosen together, every corner filled with our memories, birthday balloons, Christmas lights, late-night talks on the porch, now belonged to him. And the kids, my children, the small, bright beings who had once clung to me every morning and every night, were now being handed over as if they were property to be traded. I wanted to scream, to throw myself across the room, to stop the gavel from falling. But I couldn't. I was frozen in a wave of disbelief. The judge's voice droned on, a series of legal terms I barely understood, but the words I did hear cut me deeper than any blade. Custody, full, his. Visitation, minimal. Review later, later, later. That word tasted like ash in my mouth, hollow and cruel. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I could see my children in my mind's eye, laughing, running through the backyard, their small hands reaching for mine. And suddenly the tears came, not in the courtroom, but inside my head, where no one could see them. Then he turned to me. That smile. Not a smile of regret, not a smile of sadness, but a smile that made my stomach twist, one that radiated triumph and cruelty. "You'll never see the kids again," he said quietly, letting each word sink into the space between us. It wasn't loud, not theatrical, just enough. Just enough for me to feel the finality, the weight of his victory. He chuckled softly, a sound I would carry with me for weeks, months, maybe years. I wanted to respond. I wanted to beg, to argue, to plead. But my voice had vanished somewhere between the papers on the table and the echo of his laughter. I sat there, my hands trembling, nails digging into my palms, trying to convince myself that I wasn't shaking, that I was still standing. People around me shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one reached out. I realized in that moment that no one else mattered. The world could see what they wanted. A defeated woman crumpled at the edges, but they didn't see the fire that had started to flicker inside me, quiet but persistent. When the gavel finally came down, the sound echoed in my chest. A verdict, a sentence, a declaration that my life as I knew it was over. The papers were signed. The house was his. The children were his. My name was on the record, but my voice, my rights, my heart, they had been stripped away in a single moment. And yet, as I walked out of the courtroom, head bowed, shoulders stiff, something inside me whispered, "They don't know me yet. They think I'm broken, but they haven't seen what I am capable of when I am underestimated. They have taken my home, my children, my dignity, but they haven't taken me, not yet." I cried exactly one time after that day. Once. In my car, parked in the shadow of the grocery store, the engine humming quietly beneath me, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles burned. The tears came not in big sobs, but in a quiet, slow unraveling, the kind that makes your chest ache and your stomach knot. I let them fall. I let myself be human for that single private moment. After that, I stopped. Because broken women don't win custody battles. Broken women don't get their lives back. Broken women disappear into statistics, and I was done disappearing. I let them think I was finished. I smiled when people spoke to me, even when I wanted to scream. I answered emails politely but briefly. I nodded in agreement when they expected me to accept defeat. I withdrew, became small, invisible, just another defeated figure in the aftermath of divorce. He would see me crumble. That's what he expected. That's what everyone expected. But invisibility is power when used correctly, and I learned to wield it like a shield. I moved into a small apartment with thin walls and too much silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your own thoughts sound louder than they have any right to. I worked 2 jobs, never letting fatigue show. I learned to cook just enough to keep myself alive and healthy. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes less, because I couldn't afford to waste time mourning in bed. The world had taken my home, my children, my sense of security, and I would not give it the satisfaction of seeing me collapse entirely. And yet, every night, when the apartment was quiet and the world outside seemed to keep moving as if nothing had happened, I wrote. I wrote down dates, amounts, conversations, overheard remarks. I documented inconsistencies, lies, things people had said in passing. I kept receipts, copies of emails, bank statements. Every scrap of information that could be useful later, I collected. Slowly, methodically, like a spider spinning a web in silence, unnoticed, delicate, and strong. I remembered every detail. The nights he came home late, pretending it was work. The whispered phone calls in the kitchen. The nervous glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The times I signed documents without reading them because I trusted him. Trust, I realized, is expensive, sometimes ruinously so, and I had paid in full. But I was learning. Every betrayal, every laugh that cut me open, became a lesson. I became a master of patience. I became invisible, and in that invisibility I grew stronger. People assumed I was broken, that I was defeated, that my spirit had been crushed in the courtroom like a fragile object. But they didn't know that I had started planning. They didn't know that every moment I spent alone, every quiet tear, every long night at work was preparation. And while they slept easy, thinking they had won, I was building a foundation that would not just restore what had been taken, but surpass it. I studied. I learned. I sharpened my mind. Legal articles, financial records, strategies for custody battles, every detail I could grasp I absorbed. My heartbreak became fuel. My despair became clarity. I let the world see the woman who had been broken. They were satisfied with the illusion. They laughed, they whispered, they moved on. They never suspected that behind the quiet composure, behind the calm exterior, a storm was forming. A storm precise, relentless, and unstoppable. And when it would hit perfectly, not in anger, not in violence, but in truth. Because they hadn't yet realized that I was not broken. I was learning. I was preparing. I was coming back, stronger than anyone could imagine. And when I did, they wouldn't just be surprised, they would remember exactly who they had underestimated. Silence became my weapon. While he flaunted his victory, assuming I had been broken, I worked quietly, methodically, behind the scenes. I learned to read between the lines of statements and contracts. I learned to notice the little inconsistencies, the small lies people tell when they think no one is watching. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to reconstruct the truth that had been buried beneath his confidence, beneath the illusion of control he had so carefully built. The first clue came in a bank statement I managed to obtain legally through an old joint account. A small transfer, almost insignificant, that didn't match the numbers on the paperwork he had filed during the divorce. I stared at it, heart pounding, realizing that it was the first breadcrumb in a trail that could unravel everything. At first I hesitated. I had been humiliated once. The thought of confronting him directly made my stomach twist. But I didn't need confrontation. I needed preparation, patience, observation. I became meticulous. Every document, every receipt, every note I could collect was cataloged, filed, and cross-referenced. I studied financial records, legal loopholes, property transfers, and shell companies. He had thought he could hide assets, move money, manipulate statements, and the courts would never notice. But he had underestimated me. He had assumed my grief would consume me, that my anger would burn me out before I could act. Instead, it became fuel. The more I discovered, the clearer it became. He had not only taken my home and my children, but had deliberately concealed financial resources during our divorce. Offshore accounts, unreported property, investments hidden under third-party names. He had been meticulous, almost arrogant, and it was his arrogance that would undo him. I didn't act rashly. I didn't threaten or harass. I built a case, quietly, legally, and carefully. I consulted attorneys in confidence, asking questions without revealing my identity, learning what evidence would matter most in court. I practiced patience, waiting for the right moment to strike, the moment when the truth would land with maximum impact. At the same time, I rebuilt myself emotionally. I couldn't allow bitterness or anger to cloud my strategy. I trained my mind to be sharp, calm, and focused. Every night I reviewed my files, cross-checking statements, confirming dates, making sure every piece of evidence was solid. Every night I imagined the courtroom, the look on their faces when the truth came out. I imagined the shock, the disbelief, the unraveling of the carefully constructed illusion of his perfect victory. And I waited. People outside my apartment saw me as quiet, maybe even defeated. But that was the perfect cover. No one suspected that behind my calm exterior, I was constructing a legal storm that would strip him of his unearned triumph. I became invisible, untouchable, patient. My grief became focus. My sorrow became discipline. By the time I stepped back into the courtroom, I was prepared in every sense. The documents, the records, the evidence, they were not just proof. They were my weapon. Not a weapon of rage, not of revenge and anger, but a weapon of precision, truth, and inevitability. And when I revealed it all, I knew, without doubt, that the tables would turn. The arrogance that had allowed him to laugh at my defeat would become the very thing that broke his confidence. Because he had assumed that grief and despair could contain me. But I had transformed them into strategy. Every betrayal, every loss, every mocking smile he had directed at me had become fuel. And the fire he had lit in me was now ready to consume the very foundations of the life he thought he had won. The day I returned to the courtroom, I felt no fear. I had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times in my mind, every step, every word, every document ready. The room smelled the same, old paper and stale coffee, but now it felt different. It felt like the calm before a storm. I walked in quietly, head held high, every movement measured, controlled. I was no longer the defeated woman they had assumed I was. I was a force they hadn't anticipated. He didn't look at me. Of course he didn't. Why would he? He had won. Or so he thought. His lawyer sat beside him, smug and confident, flipping through papers with that same air of arrogance. He believed, as everyone else had, that I had been broken, invisible, harmless, and that belief, his confidence in my defeat, would be his undoing. My attorney stood and began to speak. Slowly, deliberately, like a conductor bringing an orchestra to life. Every word, every document, every piece of evidence was presented with clarity and precision. Offshore accounts, hidden properties, unreported assets, discrepancies in financial statements, lies under oath. Every detail I had collected over months of quiet, painstaking work was laid bare. I watched his lawyer's face first. It started pale, but then the color drained completely, leaving an ashen, almost ghostly expression. I could feel the tension in the room shift, almost like electricity. My ex finally turned his head, eyes widening as he realized the tide had changed. For the first time, his smug confidence faltered, replaced with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. The judge leaned forward, asking pointed questions, one after another, about accounts, transfers, and assets. My attorney answered each calmly, referencing the meticulously organized evidence. Each revelation, each undeniable fact was a blow, not of anger, not of revenge, but of truth. The courtroom, once a place of humiliation for me, was now a stage for justice. I kept my composure, even when my children peeked through the gallery. They didn't understand the details, of course, but they understood me. They could see I was calm, in control, and that the words that had hurt them before were now being undone by my careful preparation. I had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing compared to the real weight of seeing his world unravel in silence. By the time the final decision came, the room was still. Shared custody, financial penalties, reassessment of assets, and most importantly, a recognition of the deceit he had tried to hide. The judge's words fell like the hammer of truth, precise and final. My ex said nothing. He had no words left, no laughter, no smug grin. He simply stared, pale and defeated, at the woman he had once mocked and tried to break. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, the years of anxiety, pain, and fear slowly releasing. Justice had been done, not through violence, not through cruelty, but through patience, intelligence, and unwavering focus. The revenge I had dreamed of wasn't about ruin. It was about truth, exposure, and reclaiming what had been taken from me. When my children returned to my arms that evening, they didn't ask questions. They just held me tightly, as if they had always known I would come back for them. The house, the money, the legal battles, none of it compared to this moment. I had been underestimated, belittled, and mocked, but now the story had reversed. And as I watched my ex leave the courtroom, his lawyer shaking his head in disbelief, I smiled quietly to myself, not with malice, not with hatred, but with the satisfaction that comes from knowing the truth is absolute, and it had been revealed. They had assumed I was broken. They had been wrong. I was stronger than they had ever imagined, and that strength would carry me forward, unbroken, unshaken, and free.